Have you heard the one about the guy that kept the mummified corpse strapped to the side of his Model T Ford and carried her around for 40 years? Well, we're spilling the tea on Hazel Farris. Silky friends, how you doing today? I have shot this video 2 or 3 times. Yeah, I'm going to be talking fast because I'm running out of daylight. If you're new to this channel, I'm Lily, and this is Silky Southern Tea, where we tell stories that you probably never heard of. And we do it all with a little bit of tea. Hold on to your britches because we're going to speed on through this one. Today's tea is green tea because of its preservative, health properties. Because this woman traveled around as a sideshow for 40 years, mummified. Maybe this was her secret. Today's hat is going to be kind of garish, I'm just telling you. Because this is a sideshow and it is what it is. Alright, let's buckle up and go. There are various stories about Hazel Farris. Back at the turn of the 19th century, it's hard to get accurate details, so I'm going to kind of give you a little synopsis of the different variations. Hazel Farris was either born in Alabama or Kentucky. Who knows? It seems that she may have had family in Kentucky. We don't really know for sure. What we do know is that Hazel was an orphan and she grew up, kind of sketchy. But in the early 1900s, she married a guy from Louisville, Kentucky. There are a couple of different stories about this. One is that they were both drinking and carousing and they would fight all the time, being drunk and whatever. The other story is that she was a very nice, pleasant woman, and her problem wasn't drinking back in that day, it was shopping. So, it used to lead to a lot of fights one way or the other between her and her husband. One day, they got into a knockdown dragout over the fact that Hazel wanted to buy a new hat. I guess money being tight, that was not an option. So one thing led to another, and it literally came to blows. She was serious about her hat, honey. Anyway, as it happened, she was getting the short end of the stick, and so she grabbed a pistol, and she went and she killed her husband in cold blood right there, and his body was laying on the living room floor. Well, it was in the middle of broad daylight, so here come some police officers that happened to be walking by, and they heard the ruckus. They run in, and they are the next 3 victims. She shoots them deader than a doornail right there in her house. So now she has 4 bodies in her living room. And while she's deciding what to do, another policeman comes walking down the road in front of her house. He hears the ruckus. He goes rushing in, and he trips over her husband's body. Well, when he did, he had his gun out. He was going to try to, take Hazel in. He shoots off a finger of her left hand. Well, it didn't work out too good for him because Hazel turned around and shot him dead too. So now you've got a husband and 4 officers dead in the floor. Well, Hazel did what any reasonable adult would do. She ran out the back door, and she was hightailing it for Alabama. Now, she landed in Bessemer, Alabama, where I don't know if she knew people, whatever, but Bessemer was like a little Sin City back then. There was all kind of stuff going on. Now, there are 2 different stories about Hazel back in those days. One is that she posed as a schoolmarm and, just kind of wanted to blend in, stay under the radar. And the other one is that she was a lady of the evening, and that's how she made her living. Now, I don't know. But what we do know is that somewhere in here she got involved with another gentleman, possibly a policeman. But even if the school teacher story is true, she was a drinker by that time, probably to forget what she had done in Louisville. I'm just saying. One day in a drunken stupor, she decides to confess her sins to this boyfriend of hers. What he didn't know until she told him was that she had a $500 price on her head. Well, in 1906, $500 was a lot of money. And so, love went right out the window and he wanted his paycheck. So he turned her in, presumably for the reward money. So as the police are about to come down on her and she's at the house and now she has nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, she decides she's not going to spend the rest of her life in prison. So she makes a concoction to drink. It was, we think, whiskey and arsenic. whiskey and strychnine, something. Anyway, she chugged it, and then she died right there on the floor. Well, her body was taken to the Adams Vermillion furniture store there in Bessemer because he made caskets, along with all the other furniture. And it sometimes served as a makeshift morgue. Well, while they're trying to decide what to do with Hazel, because nobody wants to pay to have her buried, she's not their problem, they get a letter from a woman in Kentucky that reports that she is Hazel's mother. She says, please do not bury that body because I'm going to come and get it. Well, they waited and waited, and nobody came. The story is that Hazel's parents weren't actually dead, and her dad was so furious of the shenanigans that she had pulled in Louisville and all the dead officers that he wanted nothing to do with her, and he forbade his wife from coming to claim her daughter's body. So there she sat in the furniture store. Well, lo and behold, her body did something very strange. It did not start to decay. It just kind of shrunk and shriveled. It wasn't doing what normal bodies do. Well, it didn't take very long for it to shrivel down to a mere 37 pounds. They didn't know what to do with his body. It had just turned into a mummy. So he did what any good businessman would do. He sat it up in the corner, and he had it as part of his display. I don't know. Did mamas bring their kids in there and say, look, Billy, you behave yourself or you could turn out just like Hazel Farris? I don't know. But it became such an attraction that they decided to start charging admission. Yeah, 10 cents. 10 cents a head to come in and see this mummified body. Well, this went on for a while, and once he made all the money he could possibly make off Hazel's body, he sent it to his brother in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. His brother kind of did the same thing there. He took her around and he showed her off. He charged admission. 'Cause what else you gonna do with a mummy? Well, this lasted about a year until one day a traveling carnival man called O.C. Brooks came into town. He saw Hazel and he thought, this would be a good addition to my sideshow, right? So he decides he wants to buy Hazel. He purchased her for $25. And what did he do? He strapped her to the sideboard of his Model T Ford, and off they went. And they went, and they went. For 40 years, he took Hazel around everywhere. Now, being the marketing genius that he was, he decided to create the story that if you touched Hazel's hand, the one that had been shot off, she would bring you good luck and lots of money. Well, she certainly brought him money, that's for sure. So if you wanted to touch Hazel's hand, you had to pay an additional 25 cents. And this really paid off for Mr. Brooks. Even during the Great Depression, when everybody was starving and broke and just hanging on by a shoestring, he made $150 to $200 a week by showing Hazel. So he had a nice little business going on there. What else you gonna do during the Depression? Got to make a dollar somewhere. As time passed, they traveled all over the place, and they even went overseas, and they were visited by European royalty. I bet Hazel never could have imagined that in her lifetime. Well, after World War II, people weren't so anxious to pay for a visit to a mummy. It had just been a terrible war. People did not want to think about death, and business really slowed down. So Mr. Brooks kind of took her out of the limelight for a little bit. But on April Fool's Day, 1950, O.C. Brooks passed away, and there was Hazel, still sitting there. But in his will, Mr. O.C. Brooks had given Hazel to his 12-year-old nephew, Luther. Because every 12-year-old boy wants a mummy, right? So that made Luther somewhat of a celebrity. I don't know if she was a babe magnet or what, but everybody wanted to come to his garage and see his mummy, and he was the only boy in the county, probably the state, or maybe even the country, that had his own mummy. I guess that makes you popular. Anyway, the mummy had come with a letter from Mr. Brooks saying that he was so very, very sorry about what he had done to poor Hazel. Because during this 40 years, her nose got knocked off. She lost another finger. They're traveling on a sideboard. It's no bed of roses. And he said, do not use her as a sideshow. She is not a freak. I realize that now, and I'm so sorry, and I repent, whatever. Because he knew he was going to go meet his maker. He didn't want to have to explain to God why he showcased a mummy for 40 years. So like the obedient boy he was, Luther did the same thing. He started taking her around. He made a little traveling carnival show out of her, and he did that for several years. Now, in O.C. Brooks' letter to Luther, he did have one exception. He said you can show her and you can use her for monetary gain if you give the proceeds to charity. So later on in life, Luther had grown up. He had used her as a sideshow piece, and he had gotten his money out of her, I guess. And so he decided he would continue to raise money, but he gave it to the church. Yeah, they built a lot of churches with that money. Because it's okay to desecrate a body as long as it's for God, right? That seems a little shady to me. So finally, in 1974, Bessemer had built the Hall of History, and they actually showcased Hazel there for a while. And people came, just like they did all the rest of the time, to look at her body. Now here is some pictures of the actual Hazel Farris. This one is her laid out there on display. And here's another one of her mummified face. And here's a newspaper clipping. She was quite the attraction. So in 1975, Luther wanted to just donate her to the University of Alabama, but they said, I don't think so. Her last formal appearances were in 1994 and 1995 back in Bessemer again. But finally, in 2002, National Geographic came along and they did a program on the Traveling Mummy Show of Alabama. Well, they looked at her body, and they had also had some students from Vanderbilt who did kind of like a little test on her skin, and they did find arsenic. But here is the thing. When National Geographic did the full autopsy, they said this. They found blood clots in her lungs, and they said, I don't think this was poison. I don't think she killed herself. I think she died of pneumonia. So was this the same Hazel Farris? Were the stories about the police true? There is no definitive report that can be verified to say it was or wasn't Hazel Farris. All we know is it was a mummy and it did travel around. Maybe poor Miss Farris just died of pneumonia and somebody wanted to make a big old story about it. But where did the arsenic come from? Well, they think that probably in an effort to preserve the body until her mom could get her, they just used whatever they had on site, and that would have been arsenic. And for some reason, arsenic will preserve a body. Who knew? That's where they think those traces came from. So in 2002, after National Geographic did all of their stuff and their autopsy, they said this. You need to cremate this woman. Let's put an end to this madness. So they did. Finally, she came to rest in pieces. I do not know if they buried her, what they did with her body, but I think she'd had enough of public recognition. On a side note, they do say that they think the Bessemer Hall of History is a little bit haunted, and they think it's Hazel. Lights going out and strange noises. Well, I think that could be any number of things they might have in there. I'm thinking if Hazel is somewhere haunting somewhere, she's probably in a car junkyard next to that old Model T kicking its tires. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Okay, so that ends the story of Hazel Farris and the Traveling Mummy. What did you think of this story? Please comment below. Let me know. Have you ever heard it? I missed the whole National Geographic thing. I can't believe that. Like, I watch all kind of crazy stuff. But yeah, are you enjoying this series so far? As we get into October, I will probably do a few ghost stories, maybe some folklore, whatever. Kind of get into spooky season. But if you love stories that you've probably never heard before, well, you've come to the right place, and you need to hit that like and subscribe button. The like button really helps me out. Comments help me out. This is a new channel, so I'm trying to build it, and I think I'm done for the day. It's about time. I'll see you next week. Enjoy this silky Sunday, and maybe take a nap. And remember, my sweet friends, to stay silky.